Hey, what's up guys? It's Matt with the Movement System. If your hips always feel tight, restricted, or achy, then this video is for you because we're gonna show you exactly why and most importantly, how to fix it fast. We're gonna break down the 4 key hip movements that affect nearly everything from your squat depth to your sprint speed, to how your back feels when you sit too long. These movements are hip flexion, hip external rotation, hip internal rotation, and hip extension. For each one, I'll show you a quick self-test so that way you can find out exactly where your own hip mobility is restricted, and I'll also show you a biomechanics-based strategy so that way you can address it. By the way, if you are a coach or trainer working with clients to improve their hip mobility, we also have a hip mobility masterclass linked in the description below. It is completely free and it's packed with assessment tools, mobility drills, and coaching strategies that you can use to improve your client's hip mobility. So make sure you check that out. Okay, let's go ahead and dive into it. First up, we have hip flexion. This is your ability to bring your knee toward your chest. And this is a crucial movement for squatting, sitting, sprinting, lunging, and other movements that you do day to day. So here's the test. Lie on your back with both legs out straight and then slowly lift one knee up towards your chest. Make sure that your knee stays moving in a straight line and doesn't come out to the side. Now you want to figure out if you can get your hip to a 90-degree angle or beyond without feeling a pinch or a block or having your leg deviate out to the side. If your opposite leg lifts off the ground or if your knee barely passes 90 degrees, then your hip flexion is restricted. Now remember where you got to before it felt tight or when you started to feel a pinch, because what you want to do is to perform the drill to fix it and then retest to make sure that it actually worked. So now let's move on to the drill to fix it. And that drill is a deep assisted squat. Basically, what we want to do here is hold a deep squat position, but use as much assistance as needed to get there. I like using something like TRX straps for this, but this can be as simple as holding onto a countertop or a kitchen sink or a squat rack and then just slowly and gradually sitting the hips down. Having something to hold and assist you here allows you to get deeper and relax into this position. And you can use as many modifications as you need here. A lot of people like to elevate the heels on wedges, for example. Whatever you need to do to allow yourself to relax into a deeper squat position. Once you are able to relax into that deeper squat position, focus on 10 to 15 slow, controlled breaths. Over the course of those 10 or 15 breaths, you'll feel more range of motion, more freedom of movement, and hopefully less of a pinch in the front side of your hip. Once you spend some time going through all those breaths in that position, go back to your back and retest your hip flexion to see if that motion has improved. This helps a lot of people, so chances are your hip flexion range of motion improved and it feels a lot better. Also, the next drill that we're about to show you that's more for hip external rotation also does tend to improve hip flexion as well. Typically, limited hip flexion is paired with limited hip external rotation. So this next drill should add to the gains that you made with first drill. Okay, so here's the self-test that you can do for hip external rotation. March your knee up to a 90-degree position and then rotate the leg across the body. The amount that it rotates across is your hip external rotation. If it only rotated a few degrees, that'd be 5 or 10 degrees. As you slowly rotate into hip external rotation, you're gonna go from 5, 10, 15 degrees and beyond. Make sure that you hold on to something for support here and fully march that knee up to a 90-degree angle. Full range of motion for hip external rotation is about 40 to 60 degrees. So ideally you want to see that leg come at least halfway up to flat. And I will mention that this is the position that I often use for clients that I'm consulting online, but if you are testing someone in person, or if you have someone who can help you do this test, a better hip rotation test is this. Lay on your back and fully relax while they rotate your leg across the body like this. I think this is a lot more comfortable and more accurate, but either way can work. Okay, so what should you do though if your hip external rotation is limited less than 40 degrees? Well, I would recommend some variation of a pigeon stretch. This is a great movement for stretching the glutes and getting the hips into external rotation. Now, if you're limited in range of motion, you can actually regress this by adding a yoga block underneath the hip or by doing this on an incline bench, for example. Again, you'll want to find a stretch and then hold for 10 to 15 deep breaths. Once you do this, you want to retest your range of motion and make sure that it actually improved. If your range of motion is improving, then you know you're on the right track with this drill. Okay, moving on to a really important movement, and that is hip internal rotation. I've seen a lot of clients with limited hip internal rotation for one reason or another. It's common to lose hip internal rotation range of motion after lower body injuries or from years of heavy lifting without doing mobility work. But hip internal rotation is a key movement for athletic movements like change of direction and cuts and rotational control. And it's even important for having stability in something like a Bulgarian split squat. So here's the self-test to figure out your hip internal rotation range of motion. Again, march your knee up to a 90-degree angle, but this time rotate the foot out to the side. And if you are testing with someone else, you can lay on the back and then rotate their leg out like this. Full hip internal rotation range of motion is typically 30 degrees or more. And believe it or not, I've actually consulted clients with negative hip internal rotation. They couldn't even get to straight. But luckily, this is one that typically does improve quite a bit when you train it directly. The drill that I like to use for this is an offset stance single leg RDL. For this drill, you want to reach your hand to the outside of the opposite foot while hinging at your hip. You can start this drill with no weight, just focusing on reaching to the opposite shin and tracing the fingers down the shin. Focus on getting the movement right here and making sure that your hip is sitting back to the back wall. This needs to be very slow and controlled, and almost everyone that I coach makes the same mistake initially. They just round from the trunk and reach forward rather than shifting the hip way back to the back wall, keeping the knee forward over the shoelaces. If you're doing this right, midway down the shin, you should feel a deep stretch in the back of your hip on the stance leg. And usually you could put 1 or 2 fingers on that spot where you feel the deep stretch. That's a good indication that you're doing this exercise correctly. You want to get to that deep stretch position and hold it for 1 or 2 deep breaths and then stand up all the way and do another repetition. I typically like to work here for about 1 to 2 minutes and then retest range of motion. So go back to that hip internal rotation test and make sure that your mobility improved. All right, and then lastly, we have hip extension. And this is important for running, deadlifting, finishing a jump, or anything where your hip's gonna extend behind your body. When it's limited, your lower back tends to extend instead of your hip. So here's the self-test. This is called the Thomas test. And for this, you're gonna want to lay back onto a box or a bench while hugging one knee into the chest, and you're gonna let the opposite leg slowly fall down. You wanna see the knee fall slightly below the level of the hip without the foot kicking out. Make sure though that you keep a tight grip on the opposite leg. If you're limited in hip extension and your leg doesn't fall down and your knee kind of stays up in the air, then here's the fix that you're gonna wanna do. We want to train the hip flexors through full hip extension. I think the most practical way to do this is with the hip flexor rock back. Simply anchor one foot to the ground and then rock back on a box like this. You want this to be slow and controlled, and you want to be able to go all the way back into full hip extension. It's a really similar position to the test, but this time you're actively working on lengthening that hip flexor muscle. Train this for 8 to 10 slow, controlled repetitions and then retest. I do also want to give an honorable mention to this hanging hip flexor knee raise. It's great. It's just a little bit more difficult to set up, not quite as practical. Either way though, what you want to do is find that position where you're working the hip flexor all the way into hip extension, because that's where you're going to see your range of motion improve. So once you work through that extended range of motion, retest, make sure that you're able to get more hip flexor length, and then you'll know that that's the right drill, you're on track, and you just need to keep working it. Okay, there you have it, 4 main motions of the hip and a drill to address and improve each one. If you want to learn even more, make sure you go register for our free hip mobility masterclass linked below. That's where you'll learn exactly how to assess hip mobility with a little bit more depth than we can get into today. And you'll also learn more biomechanics-based strategies to build strength through that new range of motion and help it last. If this video helped you, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and drop a comment below if one of these drills worked for you. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.